On the night of October 24, 1944, the submarine USS Tang was on the surface of the Taiwan Strait, hunting a Japanese convoy. Her captain, Commander Richard O'Kane, had already sunk more enemy ships than any other submarine commander in the Pacific. The Tang was on her 5th war patrol, and she was running out of torpedoes. 2 remained in the tubes. The convoy was right in front of them. O'Kane ordered the last 2 torpedoes fired. The first ran straight and hit a Japanese transport. The second did not. Something went wrong with its steering mechanism. The torpedo curved left, then kept curving, tracing a wide circle through the dark water. On the bridge, the men watched the phosphorescent wake arc away from the target and begin to swing back toward them. 20 seconds later, the Tang's own torpedo slammed into her port side near the stern. The explosion tore the aft section apart. The submarine's stern sank immediately. The bow rose out of the water at a steep angle and then plunged. Within seconds, the Tang was on the bottom of the Taiwan Strait, 180 feet below the surface. Of the 87 men aboard, roughly half died in the first minutes. The survivors were trapped in a steel tube filling with smoke, seawater, and toxic fumes from cracked batteries. The USS Tang had been the most successful submarine in the US Navy. In 14 months of combat, she had sunk 33 enemy ships, totaling over 116,000 tons. She had rescued 22 downed American pilots from the open ocean. She had received 2 Presidential Unit citations. O'Kane was the kind of commander other captains studied and envied. Calm under pressure, aggressive in attack, and unwilling to leave a fight while targets remained. None of that mattered now. The Tang was on the bottom, broken, flooding, and the men still alive inside her had a limited amount of time before the air ran out, or the toxic chlorine gas from the mixing seawater and battery acid killed them. When the torpedo struck, 9 men had been topside on the bridge and conning tower. The force of the explosion threw most of them into the water. 3 of them managed to stay afloat through the night, treading water in the dark, surrounded by burning wreckage and the debris of the Japanese ships the Tang had just attacked. By dawn, they were barely conscious. Below decks, the situation was worse. The aft compartments were destroyed or flooded. The surviving crew, roughly 30 men, gathered in the forward torpedo room, the most intact section of the hull. The lights were out. Emergency lanterns provided a weak yellow glow. Water was rising. The air was thickening with fumes. They had one chance: the Momsen lung. The Momsen lung was a rubber breathing device invented in the late 1920s by a Navy officer named Charles Momsen. It was a simple apparatus, a rubber bag worn around the neck, connected to 2 tubes. The user breathed through one tube, exhaling carbon dioxide into the bag, where a soda lime cartridge absorbed it. The other tube provided oxygen. Once in the water, the bag also functioned as a small flotation device. Every submarine in the US fleet carried Momsen lungs. Every submariner was trained to use them. But no one had ever used one to escape from a sunken submarine in combat conditions at this depth. 180 feet was near the limit of what the device was designed for. At that depth, the water pressure was enormous. Rising too fast could cause the bends, air embolism, or lung rupture. Rising too slow meant running out of oxygen in the lung before reaching the surface. The men in the forward torpedo room knew all of this. They also knew they had no other option. They flooded the forward escape trunk, a small chamber built into the hull with a hatch that opened to the sea. The procedure was straightforward in theory. Enter the trunk, flood it, equalize the pressure with the surrounding water, open the outer hatch, and ascend to the surface while breathing through the Momsen lung. Exhale steadily on the way up. Do not hold your breath, or the expanding air in your lungs would tear them apart. The first group of men entered the trunk. The valves were opened. Seawater poured in. The pressure built. Some men panicked. Some could not equalize the pressure in their ears and had to be pulled back. Some made it through the outer hatch and began the long ascent. 180 feet of black water, at night, alone, breathing through a rubber bag, rising toward a surface they could not see. The ascent took several minutes. Some men exhaled too slowly and suffered air embolism. Some inhaled water. Some made it to the surface and floated, too weak to move, waiting for daylight. 13 men made it out of the escape trunk. Of those 13, 5 survived the ascent and the hours of floating in the open ocean that followed. Combined with the 3 men from the bridge who had been thrown into the water during the explosion, a total of 8 men survived the sinking of the USS Tang. A 9th survivor, who had been on the bridge, managed to stay afloat by inflating his trousers, tying the legs closed and trapping air inside them, a trick taught in basic training that most sailors never expected to use. 9 men out of 87. At dawn, a Japanese destroyer escort appeared, the same convoy that the Tang had been attacking. The Japanese sailors pulled the 9 Americans from the water. When the survivors realized who was rescuing them, they understood why the beatings started immediately. The Japanese sailors and soldiers aboard the escort were survivors of the ships the Tang had sunk that night. They were burned, wounded, furious. The Americans were clubbed, kicked, and beaten on the deck of the ship that had just fished them out of the ocean. Commander O'Kane was among the 9 survivors. He later wrote about the experience with characteristic understatement. When we realized that our clubbings and kickings were being administered by the burned, mutilated survivors of our own handiwork, we found we could take it with less prejudice. The 9 survivors spent the remaining 10 months of the war in Japanese prisoner of war camps. They endured starvation, beatings, and forced labor. O'Kane weighed 90 pounds when he was liberated in August 1945. After the war, O'Kane was awarded the Medal of Honor for his last 2 war patrols. The citation described his aggressive tactics, his disregard for personal safety, and the extraordinary record of the Tang. He was considered the most successful submarine commander of World War II. The Tang was the only documented case in which a Momsen lung was used to escape a sunken submarine in actual combat conditions. The device had been tested in training tanks and used once before, during the peacetime sinking of the USS Squalus in 1939, but never at this depth, never under these conditions, and never after a submarine had been hit by its own torpedo. The Squalus incident had its own nightmare quality. In May 1939, during a routine test dive off the coast of New Hampshire, a valve failure flooded the aft compartments of the submarine. The Squalus sank to 243 feet with 59 men aboard. 26 drowned in the initial flooding. The remaining 33 survived in the forward compartments and were rescued over the course of 13 hours by a diving bell lowered from a surface ship, an operation led by the same Charles Momsen who had invented the escape lung. The Squalus was later raised from the ocean floor, repaired, renamed USS Sailfish, and sent back to war. In one of the cruelest ironies of the Pacific War, the Sailfish later sank a Japanese aircraft carrier that was carrying American prisoners of war from the USS Sculpin, the same submarine that had first located the sunken Squalus and helped guide the rescue. Submariners in World War II had the highest casualty rate of any branch of the US military. Of the 16,000 Americans who served on submarines in the Pacific, roughly 3,500 died, a fatality rate of about 22%. 52 American submarines were lost during the war. Most went down with all hands. The men who served on them knew the odds. They called the submarine service the coffin service. They went anyway. The wreck of the USS Tang lies on the floor of the Taiwan Strait, 180 feet below the surface, in the same position where she settled on the night of October 24, 1944. The hull is intact enough to be recognizable as a submarine. Divers have visited the site. The escape trunk hatch is still open. 9 men climbed out of a steel coffin on the ocean floor in the middle of the night, breathing through rubber bags, ascending through 180 feet of black water toward a surface they could not see, surrounded by the burning wreckage of the ships they had just destroyed. 5 of them made it by escaping through the trunk, 3 by clinging to debris, 1 by inflating his pants. The Tang killed herself with her own torpedo. And even then, she could not kill everyone inside her.